And now, without any further ado, I would like to introduce Scott Provence. He is an L&D designer, author, and speaker whose curricula serve millions annually across the world. Scott has worked in both the public and private sectors, creating federal education programs and leading L&D teams from small startups to Google. Scott specializes in learning strategies as they relate to gamification, healthcare, change management, and technology. In 2023, his work in AI-powered communication training programs won multiple awards in the field of game-based learning. So I feel like we'll have a lot of questions for you, Scott. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And just like Dee was mentioning, excited for discussion, dialogue. So drop in conversations and questions into the chat. And yeah, I'm excited to hear what everyone has to say about this topic. And as I do that, I'm going to share my screen here. Complicated to complex. We're going to talk about different leadership skills and specifically how they apply to our new emergent 21st century environments. Just to confirm, Dee, everyone can see my screen, it sounds like?
Yep, looks good.
Thumbs up. All right, excellent. Well, again, excited to dive in. These are some of the things that I wanted to talk about today, but I really do want to keep this as conversational as possible. So as you look through this list and think about walking away in the next 45 minutes with some of these things, is there anything on this list that you would really like to see added? And if so, drop it into the chat. So we're going to talk a little bit about complexity theory. We're going to define some of the differences between what is a simple system versus a complicated system versus a complex system, and how we as managers, leaders, or even frontline instructional designers and L&D staff can adjust our approaches in these different environments. I'm sure a lot of you have gone through all sorts of leadership development programs where you might have encountered styles like directing or coaching or situational leadership. And we're going to look at those through the lens of today's very different, very emergent environments and give you guys some activities to bring back to your organization. But if there's other things that you want to look at, other burning questions, please do drop them in the chat and we'll address them as we go. Without further ado, I wanted to really also, before I jump into a lot of the resources that I am going to be referencing. Again, a lot of these ideas are built on way smarter people than me, built on decades of research. This is just a small sampling of some of those, but I do, because I borrow so much from these great thinkers, I wanted to call them out and point out how excellent some of these resources are. And if you're looking at some of these and thinking, well, how do these connect? They're all connected in my head, at least. And I would definitely say, reach out to me if you ever have an interest in, I want to learn more about Andy Grove's work on high output management, or I want to learn about some of these interactive tools that I'm going to be showing. So my email is there. I'll bring it up at the end again, but sprovence@elblearning.com. Please do reach out. I love having conversations about this. All righty. So to get us started, I actually want to get you guys thinking and interacting a bit. Let's just use the chat feature for this, but I'm going to give you all a pop quiz. As you can probably guess, there's no right answers here, but when you think about your daily work, I'm going to use the metaphor of an airport here. Which of these images best represents your daily work? Is it A, loading bags onto a plane? Is it B, flying a plane? Is it C, being the control tower, thinking all the different, trying to manage all of the different planes in the air? Or is it I'm flying through lightning every day and I'm just trying to get on the ground? We have got all sorts of good votes showing up here on our screen. So I'm going to look through our chat. Lots of C's, some D's. Sorry to hear about that. Lots of C's, a couple of B's. Don't see many A's. Yeah, I see a B, C, and D. Yep, absolutely. Cool. We got a good blend of looks like some B's and some C's. People saying you're very lucky if you're just sitting there in the cockpit there. And yeah, some good blend. So probably not a lot of A's, but a lot of B's and C's, and then sadly, some of those chaotic, weather intense environments there. Excellent. Well, yeah, my sympathy and empathy to all of us in those very confusing and frustrating times. The reason I like starting out with that is not only so we can, sympathize with each other and say, yeah, in a safe space, I feel your pain. Let's get through this together. But I like using those four metaphors or images as a way to introduce complexity theory and to understand the nature and the interactions and the differences between these four environments. This framework borrows a lot from a framework called Cynefin. It's pronounced Cynefin, spelled Cynefin. And again, I'll can give you guys links to resources. But it really looks at the distinctions between these environments. So we have loading bags on a plane, we have flying a plane, we have navigating an entire space of air, and we have flying through chaotic times. If you think about the differences between these, loading bags onto a plane, we probably got one standard operating procedure. I don't know it, and I'm sure that a lot of thought goes into it, but there's probably a best way or a standard way for loading bags onto a plane. And that's great because we've got known knowns. We can repeat it. We can write down almost like following a recipe. If I get that encoded knowledge, I can be pretty confident that I can reproduce that on every plane that I load up. When we move up and into more of a cockpit style environment, now we're dealing with a complicated domain of knowledge. So there are known unknowns, but still we have experts in this space who have gone through a lot of training and a lot of school that can give us a defined range of answers. So maybe not every pilot is going to react the exact same way, but it's still pretty replicable. Even something as complicated as landing on the moon, we have done, we know we can reproduce and have done multiple times, so that we can now say this is very complicated, but we do have the skills needed and the range of experts to kind of adjust on the fly and get us to where we want to go. I like this chat's here. Yeah, we do have cockpits hopefully in this, pilots hopefully in this cockpit, not an empty cockpit. So this is where it gets really interesting. Now we're going to stay in the top part here, but move over to the left into this environment and think about everyone who is doing this on a daily basis, kind of navigating the complex airspaces above our heads. There are known unknowns in this situation here. There are cause and effects. We have planes needing to be diverted and, changes in fuels and weather patterns and everything else. So we know that there are things that can affect multiple players in this environment, but we can't always see that and we can't always predict it. So we've got to be a little bit more adaptive in this space. And then finally, when we have those chaotic environments, something just happened, there are unknowables. We can't even attempt to predict cause and effects here. We've got to act, we've got to get safe, we got to trust our gut, and then kind of hopefully go back and see what was going on. So feel free to drop in comments or thoughts as you process this, but think about this as it relates again to your work environments. It totally makes sense that we have probably as a group, as a industry, as any organizations, probably graduating pretty quickly out of these simple processes, or if we've got simple processes still, we've documented these SOPs. And so we can say, yep, I know how to do those. I'm operating mostly in these areas. And so think about that idea of what do I know that I don't know? How do I rely on my experts for those complicated situations? But then more importantly, if I'm in those complex and even chaotic times, what do I do? How do I lead in this type of environment when I don't have an expert I can rely on, or I don't have a standard operating procedure that I can give my team? So something for us to be thinking about. And hopefully just being aware of the different frameworks that we can apply can actually give you a little bit of context and a little bit of skills and calm to bring to your organizations to say, you know what, this is not just us that's going through these hectic times. This is actually part of a process that happens as businesses grow and evolve. For those of you that are interested in bringing this back and thinking, yeah, I really like this, but how can I really show it to my leadership group or to my C-suite or my team really quickly? I've got a 5-minute little activity. I wish we could play it live. We've got too many people probably on the call right now, but if you're interested in showing complexity within 5 minutes to your teams, there's a great way to do it. I play this game. It's a great warm-up activity if you're just looking for a new warm-up icebreaker in your instructor-led trainings, but it's a game called Assassins. And if I'm leading this in a large room, we can all imagine ourselves standing in a big auditorium. I would have everyone stand up and spread out. And I would say, okay, I want you to pick one person in this room to be your assassin. And I want you to pick one person to be your bodyguard. So if this is me right here, I might pick this person way over on the back to be my assassin, and then this other person to be my bodyguard. And then the instruction is, when I say go, keep moving so that your bodyguard is always between you and your assassin. Anyone have a guess as to what this might look like? Probably pretty chaotic. You can actually do this virtually as well if you use something like Jamboard or any other Canvas, localized multi-person space. I can assign little Post-it notes with everyone's initials, and then I do the same instructions. Okay, I want, Scott, I want you to pick someone to be your bodyguard and your assassin. And when I say go, I want you to click your Post-it and move it around so you can do this online. So if you can probably guess, this looks like a little bit like this chaotic moving behavior. And yet, as much as this looks chaotic, there is cause and effect going on, right? So this is not just a mess of people moving around the screen. There are causes and effects and heuristics that are happening that are giving us some semblance of order, even if we can't see the order on the screen here. Is this pattern, are you recognizing this pattern in anything that you're seeing in your daily life or even just in nature? Is this looking familiar to anyone? Things that are coming to mind. I'm checking in our chat here. I love some of these comments too. Yes, leaders need to be able to seamlessly transition between these environments. Yep, absolutely. What this might be bringing to mind is some of the emergent and, again, seemingly chaotic patterns that we see in nature, things like flocking behaviors, right? So we can start even in this grid of pretend birds here. We can assign them some algorithmic clues and have them behave very much like the way birds do in real life. They flock together, they spread apart, they come back together. They're all following these heuristics and cause and effect relationships and creating these very, very complex patterns that as leaders, if we can zoom out and we can figure out what is going on, what are the behaviors that are happening here, we can start to, chaos here. We can start to get strategic and tactical about how we approach this. These are great comments. Keep them coming in. Very cool. All right, I'm going to pause here really quick to make sure I didn't miss any questions. Dee, am I doing okay on the question front here?
We do have a question of how do you facilitate hands-on activities when you're facilitating a virtual training, which you may have answered by this demonstration, but
yeah, the little bit of that creative thinking. If you've got a couple of those tools, even if you just did it just like I was mentioning there, quick drag your Post-it note around the screen as we, I can teach that with a globalized group and with just a little bit of extra setup. And again, that seems to work pretty well in terms of getting people to understand that concept of, oh, this is what my life feels like right now. I'm constantly running around and flocking, and how do I rely on my team or my leadership to make sense of this seemingly chaotic pattern that I have? Very cool. Well, other questions as they come up, drop them in. Let's keep exploring this a bit. I want to, the title of this talk and one of the distinctions that I want to draw, I don't want it to come off as antagonistic or that we need to throw out everything that we've learned so far, because a lot of these traditional models like situational leadership, many other high output management, some of these other frameworks that have been in place for decades are still really helpful. And so it's great to look at these linear paths that are telling me as a leader, when should I be highly directive? When do I need to be really supportive as my team is learning their own, how to stand on their own, and when do I know when to step back? That's all still really important. But again, just like some people are saying in the chat here, we need to recognize when we are operating in a linear, factory-based, predictable environment, and when we are moving out of that. And I would venture a guess that a lot of your organizations are moving out of that linear, factory line style environment, and recognizing that we're really not operating in this predictable machine. This is a different entity. It's that complex adaptive system where if I pull on one little thread over here, it can have a ripple effect across the whole organization. So thinking about this rather than I can just apply a single leadership line and just evolve as my team evolves, I'm now playing air traffic controller, and I'm trying to think about how do I keep all of these planes operating efficiently and safely with each other. There's another great quote I like to pull out here from an article in the Harvard Business Review. As leaders, we have to constantly be scanning the environment And this is more than just scanning on a daily basis for, doing my one-on-one check-ins or my, how are you doing here? I have to look specifically for weak signals. So what I mean by that is, what is the thing that it doesn't seem like it's connected, but actually is very connected here? So rather than just doing periodic analyses, like let's do our, weekly one-on-ones, or let's do our performance reviews every quarter and assume that those linear checkpoints will be able to connect the dots to some general sense of progression there. What is that constant ebb and flow of today's environment? And can I make some guesses around some of those weak signals that I'm potentially seeing here? Perfect. Just checking our chat here to see if we're good. What's your perspective that important leadership skill is? This is a good question to hear from Bob. So what is your perspective that an important leadership skill is to simplify the complex? I think this is a great way to analyze this. And the idea that one of the things that we can do as leaders to simplify the complex is to start to make guesses or point at those connections in what might seem like a disparate or chaotic environment. So everyone else looks at this and sees a flock that's moving in a chaotic direction. How can leaders, we look together and say, you know what, I actually see a pattern emerging here. Birds seem to be moving in this direction at this point. And I'll talk a little bit about how we start to spot those heuristics. Really great question from Bob. Any other questions coming up before I jump into our next little section here?
We don't have any in the Q&A. I think we're good.
This is going to get really fun now. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit now about, actually, to Bob's point in the chat here, we're going to talk about how do you as a leader start to make sense of those complex environments? How do you simplify the complex? It's never going to be as elegant or as simple as I can present it here. But one thing that we can start to do is, rather than treat things like a linear waterfall style relationship, first it goes from A, then to B, then to C, we start to look at these things in this framework of loops and signals. So this is a great causal loop system. Check out Friedrich Ratz's deeper interpretations of this. So this is a very simplified version, but take a look here at what we've got. We've got kind of an HR loop system. We've got employees at work, we've got productivity, we've got employees going home and spending time with family, coming in late versus on time, number of employees that are in training versus on the floor. This is a great big causal loop. And again, even though this looks probably pretty complex, as you can probably guess, this is very simplified compared to an actual work environment. There's probably, a dozen other, 100 other lines that I could be drawing here. The reason I wanted to draw this out is now that we start to develop, now that we know the framework, we know that things can be simple, complicated, complex, we can start to draw some of these causal loop frameworks around those complex environments. And now what we can start doing as we frame those out is start to look at feedback loops. If this is a new term, jot this down or pay attention here. If anyone knows feedback loops, put your own definitions in the chat. Feedback loops are really important when you start to look at complex environments. The definition I was given way back when about a feedback loop was, think of it like your savings account, Scott. Maybe my ideal savings account, not actually how my savings account works, but in an ideal savings account, the money stays in there, it earns some interest, and that means that there's more money in your account because it's earned some interest, which means that it actually earns more interest now, which actually means there's more money in your account, so it earns more interest. There's that reinforcing loop that provides that feedback system that can be very positive or also very negative. Can anyone see a feedback loop in this mess of complex interactions here? I'll give you a minute to kind of look through this. Is there any little mini loop here in any of these systems where if you started to increase one, you would get this feedback of, oh my gosh, that's going to keep feeding on itself? Morale, overtime loop, yeah.
Paula noted attendance.
Great, yep, these are really cool. Call-ins, yep, awesome, I love this. Okay, so perfect. This is a really cool tool I'm going to show now. So I'm going to actually demonstrate, I think I did this even here, right? Yeah, so let's find the reinforcing feedback loop. I took that same framework and Friedrich's, and I've replicated it here in this interactive tool that Nikki Case has built. And again, you can reach out to me. I can help you do this sort of thing on your own. But we've got that same loop, but now it's an interactive thing where I can click up and down on where we want to see the system moving. So someone had mentioned morale. This is a great one. Let's try it. So let's say morale went down for whatever reason. Announcement at work, organizational change, something happening in the world. Okay, morale's dropped a little bit. So we're sending out these little negative drops. Because this is an inverse relationship, they're going to flip around now. So we got low morale equals later arrivals, less employees at work. Productivity is going to drop. Now what's happening? We've got even lower morale. We've got even lower, more late arrivals, fewer employees at work, less productivity. We've now got, I can even speed this up here a bit. We've got this ongoing system where, yep, just like everyone is pointing out, you can kind of check your work here. As morale drops, there's going to be this feedback loop of lower productivity, which we can then interpret potentially incorrectly as, oh, we must need more training. Let's get more people into training, fewer employees on the floor, even lower productivity. This is going to keep feeding on itself. What's really sad is in feedback loops, even if I try to manually increase this, oh my gosh, we need more employees at work. I'm clicking up. I'm going to try to assign fewer employees to other departments. Let's get more employees at work. It's not changing. I just brought 50 more employees here, and the feedback loop is so strong that I still can't affect that. So yeah, this interrelated dynamic system. Yep, absolutely. And yeah, and these are great comments here. How do we make sure that we're not operating in the siloed mindset where, if I come in as a leader and say, oh, we just need to hire more people, that's not going to solve the problem, because as you can see, I've got this complex system here that is feeding on itself. So let's reset this. What else can I do now? Well, because these are complex systems and because we have feedback loops that can also be positive, where can I as a leader or as a manager of an L&D department come in and have potentially a lever I can pull that creates a positive feedback environment? So let's freeze our system for a second here. And as a L&D manager, I might come in and say, you know what? I think we actually have too many perceived training requirements. I actually think that we can lower those requirements and get people on the floor faster. There's a strategy I have, there's a new technology I have that can actually do better competency mapping, lower our training time. Let's lower that now. Okay, because that's a positive relationship. That's also going to lower the amount of employees in training. Ooh, more employees at work now on the floor. Ooh, higher productivity. Ooh, maybe even less training requirements. Ooh, higher morale, more time with family. Cool, let's speed this up and see what happens. This is a very positive feedback loop now. I've got late arrivals, lower people out sick. Let's say now all of a sudden I have to assign a bunch of people to another department. So there's going to be fewer employees at work. Again, I just assigned a bunch more. I've still got such a positive reinforcement loop that I'm keeping all of the things that I want really high in a great direction. And again, this is obviously way more simplified than the real world, but you can start to see that difference between the power of feedback loops and causal loops in complex environments. I just talked for a bunch of time, and so I haven't been able to check our Q&As and chats, but yeah, as people look at that and look at some of these redundancies and reinforcing loops here, thoughts or questions that come to mind? How we doing, Dee? Did I miss anything big?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, cool.
Mary's just setting up an app to submit opportunities for improvement.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've got great leaders, you can tell on this call, right, that are already starting to make that next jump of, okay, yeah, I want to start mapping this out. I want to start to apply that complex thinking where I'm thinking much more about system-wide approaches and how can I open up new opportunities for communication or collaboration, because it's not going to be solved by, well, we've got a new SOP, folks, on how to submit your timesheets. That is very much a simple answer to what is perceived as a simple problem. And we can tell here, look, the new timesheet for employees who are late is not going to affect all of this other stuff that is going to be bringing in positive and negative impacts into the system. Very cool. Yep, reevaluating internal effectiveness. Absolutely. This larger zooming out. And what happens as organizations grow is we will often see this, right? As companies, industries get bigger, there's going to be more and more pieces of the puzzle that are brought in. And what happens often as businesses become more complex is duplication increases, redundancy increases, and we have to decide as leaders, do we want to centralize our functions? Do we want to kind of say, oh, training is all going to report to one department, one person? Do we want to have that kind of centralized role for greater leverage? Or do we want to keep things decentralized for greater speed? And it's that push and pull that we as leaders have to think about. Do I want to centralize? Do I want to decentralize? What are the headwinds that I'm fighting against in either my organization or my industry that is forcing me to act faster because of competition, act more lockstep because of regulations that I need to be really thinking about leverage? All of this stuff is key to daily thinking and leadership awareness to be looking for those weak signals.
Scott, is there any difference between the red and the blue lines on this diagram?
Only on this one that I wanted to highlight one of the many reinforcing loops here. So these little R's that you see are all, and I think everyone in the chat was recognizing these, right? Recognizing anytime we have this little R here, we can see, oh yeah, this is a reinforcing loop. And so as L&D professionals, this is one that, yeah, the red was just really highlighting one that I see all the time, right? I get brought in, hey, we've got low productivity. Can you build a new training? Well, yes, we can do that. What will be the impact of building more training and bringing more employees off the floor? Will that actually make the problem worse? Will it make it better? How can we get in here and analyze not just your training requirements, but the entire system that we're working within to see what the better impact can be?
Karis brings up a good point. She wonders if there's any danger of bias in these diagrams.
Absolutely, yeah. So bias and the subjectivity of these is part and parcel with a complex environment, right? So just like I was saying earlier, like it would be incorrect and potentially even harmful if I was to just take this loop, this drawing and say, hey, C-suite, guess what? I figured out our problem. This is our entire loop here. Because like I've said, that would assume that I could almost go back to my C-suite and just say, all you have to do is pull these levers and just click up or down, and it'll solve the entire problem. This is a simplified version of a very complex environment. So I absolutely agree with Charis that there's recognizing biases, recognizing that every time I draw this, it's going to be outdated in the next day, week, month. Doesn't mean that I shouldn't be thinking about this. This gets back to that Eisenhower quote, plans, the difference between plans and planning, right? This would be a plan that I could submit and say, look, this is the solution. All we have to do is follow this for the next year and we'll be fine. That's not really helpful. Planning is the most essential thing that I can do, in recognizing that we need to be thinking about this and discussing it and adjusting as we go, because if we're not, we're going to be falling behind. Yeah, great question. I love that. All right, so what do we do with this? Yes, this is all helpful, Scott. Thanks for the framework. Thanks for the drawing. But now what am I supposed to do with this information? Because I know the question between do we centralize or do we decentralize? Do I want leverage or do I want speed is always going to be yes to both. Some of the things that I like to think about as a leader, as someone who trains, coaches, helps develop leaders, knowing that you are going to be presented this impossible problem of do both, be highly leveraged and be also very fast. What I like to encourage people to think about is this idea of heuristics. So this is something that you can, again, read about in a lot of different complexity theories. But when we think about the elaborate flocking behavior of birds, how do birds, these somewhat simple creatures, very complex in their own rights, but how do they not crash into each other, or how do they survive as a species when they're doing these seemingly chaotic flocks? People have found in studying them that birds actually follow three pretty basic heuristics. So the heuristic of separation, I need to not crowd the birds around me. The heuristic of alignment, I need to steer towards an average heading of the birds around me. And the heuristic of cohesion. So I've got to move towards some localized central point. Dumbing it down even more, because that's hard for even me to understand. If I was a bird, this is what I got to keep in my head, right? Avoid collision, match the speed of everyone, and fly towards the center. And if I follow those three basic heuristics as a bird, that's actually what creates on a global scale this very beautiful and complex flocking pattern. Heuristics have been applied all over the place. If you look back to Napoleon, he had a pretty famous heuristic called march to the sound of the guns. And that's that idea that, hey, war battles, it's chaotic environments. If you are lost or not sure what to do, march to the sound of the guns. That's a heuristic you can always keep in mind and will help you kind of create that positive reinforcement loop. U.S. Marines, I think, have 3 heuristics. Anyone who's in the Marines might be able to repeat them better than me, but it's something like capture the high ground, keep moving, stay in communication. And again, it's recognizing the plans are going to go out the window, in the first 5 minutes. So when that happens, if you're not sure what to do, keep moving, stay in communication, look for the high ground. Great heuristics that you can apply to groups that are decentralized and need to operate with incredible amount of efficiency, speed, safety, but it's still a central tenet. March away. Some others would say, I want to march away from that sound. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we've got a little bit of, I want to save a little bit of time for questions. I know that we're coming up to the last, 10-ish minutes, but because we've got such a good active group in our chat here, let's see if we can try this out before we stop for Q&A. I'm gonna give you a little mini case study and see if you can come up with any heuristics here. So again, as a leader, knowing that you're going to be in this complex environment, are there heuristics you can create for yourself, your team, your organization to know that even in those chaotic times, you can do this one thing to help out your team? So imagine you were leading a team of software developers. They're really frustrated about the lack of communication, especially on cross-departmental projects. You see this constantly in surveys. We're redundant, we're inefficient, I don't like this, there's no decision-making process. It would be one thing for me to say, don't worry, team, I've got a new SOP. It's just a standard thing. We're going to put it in place and follow these step by steps. But I'm thinking with my 21st century leader hat on, I know that that's not going to stay evergreen. So everything's going to be changing. What are some heuristics I could create instead? Something that an individual could follow, is really simple and easy to remember, and is something that everyone could do in their daily work. Any ideas for heuristic to create? Drop it in the chat. And again, there's no right or wrong answers here. These are very real situations, and so even the heuristics themselves need to be adopted and adjusted as we test them in the real world. Constant communication. Oh yeah, constant communication through Teams. When in doubt, drop it in our Teams channel. Here's this channel that anyone who's stuck, you can go to. Yeah, love it. Agility. Well, yeah, and even like building out, like what does agility look like? When in doubt, do X, Y, and Z. Yeah, updates on a board. Let's make sure that short video clips. Yeah. Err to the side of more communication than less. Yeah, if you're ever stuck, over communicate. Don't under communicate. Yeah, all of these things are these like proto heuristics that you could, as a emergent 21st century leader, recognize. We need some centralized functions. I want to test them out in live environments and see what happens here. Don't change any plans without address. Yeah, or even more detailed. Before you update our code, you have to, I'll start to blend these together. Before you update our code, go to monday.com. Let's go to our board. You have to communicate with at least 3 other people. That's your heuristic. Absolutely. All of these things, again, you start to think about combining them together, and it's not going so far as to say, well, this is going to be so codified that we put it into a list and we laminate it and we put it on the wall and follow it. Because we need to keep them adaptable enough that people can keep them in their brains and just know to apply them in any of these very disparate environments. Awesome. All right. So what to do with this? I'm going to wrap up here and make sure we've got enough time for questions and going back and double clicking in any of these things that people already saw. But things you could do with this potentially. I love talking about this. So the more people that know about these systems, the better. So either reach out to me if you need more ways to describe it and more resources to use, but take what you've learned here and you can lead your own little introductory activities. So get people to stand up in your conference room and try this out, or get them on a online jam board and start to drag around their names. Recognize as an organization or as a leadership group, where are we trying to maximize our leverage versus our speed? Again, recognizing that going in one of those directions versus the other might create kind of different organizational makeups. So where do we want to centralize? Because we need to lock down our regulation. We're getting dinged on all of our regulatory efforts. We need better leverage in a centralized function versus we are getting beat up by the competition. We need to decentralize and have a much quicker approach to how we're reaching the market. And then finally, knowing that our leadership is ultimately going to say we want both, what are the heuristics that you can create that are somewhat centralized and immutable in their own right, but can be applied in a decentralized way so that anyone, no matter what project they get dropped into, knows I got to stay in communication, I got to keep moving, I got to find the high ground to work to get to where we want to go. All right, that's everything that I've got, but I wanted to, pause here and give us a chance to do some Q&A, or happy to jump back to any of the previous slides if you want to look at something again. But I'll check in with Dee first and see if we've got anything on the queue, and if not, answer other things.
Bob would like to know if you've seen and observed any organizational impact where leaders become better at addressing VUCA, which volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity.
I think that being able to put a framework to those things and not I would say the biggest distinction is seeing like a flocking pattern, seeing a single messy desk at work that everyone in different departments seem to just kind of be dropping stuff onto. A leader might see that as chaotic, recognizing the difference between chaos and a complex environment. So this is not just completely unknowables. There is some sort of eddy or agreed upon practice that is keeping this localized issue at the front of people's minds. Having leaders recognize where a cause and effect dynamic might exist is one of the most important things you can do. Someone said this at the very start of the chat, almost that idea of, well, if it's this blend of simple and complicated and complex, I've got to do all of that. I would say the most important thing you can do is identifying which is which. And so I think that does kind of address that idea of, how do you deal with uncertainty, or how do you deal with volatility, is recognizing that if we look at this systematically, can we assign the value of this is a complex problem, or do we really need to say that this is truly chaotic? We don't even know where we're operating, and we need to just kind of shut down and go into safe mode to get through this. Good question.
How would you advise people to make time to build in looking for these patterns and just stopping to do these assessments?
Yeah, that is really hard. I mean, it's something that I do is I try to block, I can time box it a bit, but I really think taking time to talk to people that I don't typically talk to in an organization, I think will often reveal connections and loops and redundancies that I wasn't aware of. And I think, again, I saw in the chat, someone mentioned this idea of siloed thinking. That happens to all of us, right? We get so deep into projects and we get used to talking to the same 5 people about something that, I get so lost in my own little feedback loop of why does this work keep happening this way? Getting myself out of that position and looking for, Harvard Business Review article calls it the weak signals, right? Getting out there and saying, okay, you know what? I've never talked to our QA team, or I haven't talked to them in 6 months. I should have a quick coffee chat, or a quick just check in and say, what's the biggest problem you're experiencing, or what's going on your side of the table? It's almost humorous how I've run across people on the other side of the org that are saying, oh, I've been working on that same thing. Like, I didn't know that you were also dealing with that. And then we kind of shake our heads and go, well, we should probably align this, because we're working at cross purposes, or you're putting in the positive feedback and I'm putting in the negative feedback, and we're kind of canceling each other out here.
Or they'll just introduce a new process and you're like, oh, you're doing that completely wrong. We should have talked about this.
Yeah, like, oh, why are you going in that direction? Yeah, we experienced that problem 6 months ago over here, and this is what we did to solve it. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Are there common management or leadership heuristics that you would suggest to organizations?
Yeah, good question. I love this is my favorite thing to do. But I would say that it's a great opportunity if your leadership is looking around saying, yes, we're bought in, like, love the Assassin's game, or like, yes, I see this system and I can tell that we're doing this right now. I would say that if you've got that kind of a buy-in and you're looking for, like, what are the heuristics we can apply, best thing to do is to have someone come in as either an outside observer completely, or come in with really fresh eyes to look for those systematic approaches. So again, it's really hard to spot the patterns if you're deep into the system. can be done. And I think this as a, skilled leader, you have that capability to zoom out. But if you're stuck with that, or if you're not sure what heuristic would be most applicable, bringing in outside help, consulting works, there's a lot of folks that are able to do that. But that fresh set of eyes is one of the best things you can do, where they say, you know what, I'm noticing that this fifth step that's happening is really seems to be kind of redundant here. Is there anything that we can build as a reminder to people that they don't have to always go through this one process? Because from my outside perspective, I don't see why we're doing that. And again, it's great because you can kind of dismiss that to say that's an outsider's perspective. We do that for a specific reason, but they more often than not, will expose something that you haven't been able to see because you're so used to it.
Yeah, you get too close to things.
Exactly.
Going back to the previous question, Christian would like to know if there are any accepted protocols for doing that kind of analysis.
I guess I'd want to double click to learn more about protocols. I would say there are, a lot of the resources had gathered there, have their frameworks, have the questions to ask. And again, you can happy to reach out and I can provide some of those. I would say that it's hard because on the one hand, I think Dave Snowden, who kind of came up with the Cynefin framework, even specifically said, I want to call this a framework and not a protocol or a practice, specifically because we can't think step by step. We can't just go, step 1, 2, 3, and then you're done. We have to let it have enough space or enough just kind of an outline of the system so that it evolves and flexes based on every single new emergent situation. So I know that's kind of a hard answer, but it's kind of a yes and no. We can have some loose frameworks, but anytime, maybe the answer is anytime you start to see something get codified or start to concretize into specific steps, you have your own warning flag go up and say, oh, you know what, we might need to push back a bit or give it a little more air to breathe.
Okay. Just as a reminder, we will send all of those out so people can reference them after today's event. I think we have time for one more question. Dennis would like to know, how can an incoming leader shift the dominant culture if it is not productive?
Yeah, really, really essential question. I really like the little examples that I've shown on the screen here. Even if you're just like, hey, can I take the 5 minutes to play this icebreaker game? Or hey, I took our software development team and I took what I saw as the basic building blocks of our development life cycle, and I put them in this little causal loop here. Can we click through this? Can you play with this and see what the thoughts are? And a lot of it is just that awareness raising capacity. I know people talk in terms of waterfall and agile. This is some visual ways to show more of that agile, ever evolving process to get people out of that somewhat traditional linear machine factory based thinking of just do the steps in order and everything will be fine.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, but Scott, I would like to thank you for being here and sharing all of this with us. I think you've given everybody a lot to think about.
This was so much fun. Yeah, thanks for the great questions. And yeah, please do reach out if you've got more. Always happy to talk more about this.
Thank you. I hope you come join us again.